my life of faith, and I need to discern, what is God asking of me in this relationship? What can I do? What can I not do? To help the other person, to love the other person, but also to know not only for the other person, but for me, how do I respond to this in a way that helps me move forward?
Thank you.
Yeah. So looking at creation there to serve me getting to heaven, other people are part of creation.
But I don't read spirituality in Scripture a lot, but I do seem to remember that somewhere in Scripture it says if they make you crazy, leave them. That doesn't mean isolationism. That means if they're making nuts, your spirituality is going to get all messed up. So.
For sure. Yeah. No. Again, that may be something speaking to a wound on this level.
Yeah.
In my own sense, for example, maybe I have a sense of codependency that I need to please other people. Well, certainly we need to serve other people, we need to help other people, but is that coming from a place of love or a place that's sort of compulsive? And that may be a wound here that needs to be addressed on that level, but may also be impacting me here that can apply the discernment of spirits. Yes? All right, now another word in looking at the title, the rules for the discernment of spirits. They are rules. They're rules. It's not a theological treatise. It's not, beautiful, poetic, spiritual language. It's not speculative, it's practical. They are instructions. They're practical norms regarding action. Again, his spirituality always points to action. They're rules to play the game. Ignatius was, again, as I said, a Basque, a soldier, and the retreat that he put together, the spiritual exercises, were generally given to young men. So you're talking 18, 19, 20-year-olds. So a lot of the imagery that he uses are chivalry images, battle images, which 18, 19-year-old guys love. And basically, it's a guy mentality in that, how do I play the game? Tell me the rules of the game. And Ignatius says, well, here's the rules of the game. How do I play basketball? Here are the rules of the game. This is how you play. This is how you dribble. This is how you do that. This is how you pass. This is how you shoot. And it's the rules of the game and the techniques to play the game. That's what the rules for the discernment of spirits are. They're rules. All right, if this is happening in the game, what's my best response? What's my best next play? And that's what Ignatius gives us. Very practical instructions, practical norms regarding my actions in spiritual life. If this is happening, this is what it means, and this is how I should respond. Very practical, very real. The rules, the different movements which are caused in the soul, in the good to receive them and the bad to reject them, and they are more proper for the first week. There is in this discernment of spirits a three-step process. First, I have to be aware. On all these different levels, I have to be aware of what's happening within me. A psychological awareness, a moral awareness, and a spiritual awareness within me. Certain movements have significance for our life of faith and our pursuit of God's will. And those movements are spontaneous. They just happen. But I have to be aware of that. So many of the saints will say one of the most key elements in the growth of holiness is self-awareness. Self-awareness. Teresa of Avila said, I'm just sort of paraphrasing, but something to the effect of, I would rather than someone one of the sisters being called up to be given a vision of heaven, I would rather that she have growth in self-knowledge. That's how important it was for Teresa. Because how am I to name the movements of the Spirit if I don't name the movements of my spirit and my heart and come to understand me? So it's very important for us to have a certain self-knowledge, self-awareness, psychologically, morally, spiritually. You know, M is what's, you know, some people even have difficulty naming, what am I feeling? I'm angry today. Well, are you angry or are you resentful? Are you resentful or are you hurt? Because they're different things. Subtle, but different things. And again, just as we can grow in the discernment of spirit, we must also try to grow in self-awareness. And not only being aware of ourselves, but then again aware of what's going on around us. So often we don't pay attention to what's going on around us. In my first assignment as a priest 25 years ago, I was there when Hurricane Andrew hit Miami. And it came to shore just a little bit south of where I was. We were kind of just at the point of the worst damage. But there was a lot of damage there. We were without power for a couple of weeks. We lost several of our roofs. The trees, all the neighborhood, and that neighborhood had a lot of ficus trees. And the ficus, beautiful, big, huge trees with lots of roots, but the roots go out along the top of the soil, they don't go down. So they had all fallen. And they were all, like the roots were way up several stories high. You know, it was just, and one day I was out trying to, visit some of our parishioners and see that they were okay and things like that. And I was trying to make my way back to the parish. And it was very difficult because there were no street signs, they had blown away. There were no traffic lights, they had blown away. And, there was water here and there. Sometimes you had to go off, and you didn't know if you were driving on someone's lawn or on the road. It was very disorienting. And I got to a point where I suddenly realized, I don't know where I am. And I moved forward, and I said, well, let me just go a little bit further and see. And I looked to one side of me, and I saw a building that I had never seen before. And I was supposed to be close to home. I should know this neighborhood. I saw a building that I had never seen before. And I was like, that's it, I am completely lost. And I moved just a little bit further, and the next building said Epiphany Parish Center. The building that I was looking at was the rectory where I lived. But it had always had all these shrubberies and trees all around it, and they had all blown away. So I had never actually seen the building. I recognized the trees in front of the building, they weren't there. So I saw it every day, but I wasn't deeply aware of it. So that's this growth in awareness. Once I start to become aware of these movements, then I need to understand them. And that's my use of reason. It's a cognitive activity. I have to be aware of the affect, of the feelings that are moving, of the desires that are stirring in me. But I don't just let it go. It's not this emotionalism. No. I have to understand that. I have to name, well, where are these coming from? How are they stirring? What do they mean? I need to understand, are these stirrings indeed a spiritual experience or not? And if they are, then the discernment of spirits is needed. And finally, good old Ignatius, action. Action. Then I need to do something about it. Once I'm aware and understand, all right, yes, these are of God, then my action is to accept it. Or no, this stirring is not of God. I reject it. So awareness, understanding, action.
Sir?
Yes?
If you allow me, I'll take up the rest of your time. What you've got up there, awareness, understanding, action. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Mm-hmm. I've been sober 38 years. And
God bless you, that's great.
Thank you, well, thank God.
Yeah.
And what I want to point out is those are the 12 steps. of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's where you search for who am I challenge people sometimes to compose a business card. And on that business card, you may not put whether you're married, what you do for a living, or if you have any children. What would you put on your business card? In other words, in the absence of titles, roles, and expectations, who am I?
In the early days of Alcoholics Anonymous, not the very early days, but shortly thereafter that period, Bill W. met a priest, Father Ed, I think, Father Ed something or other, I'm
I
blanking,
remember, yeah.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
who happened to be a Jesuit.
No bad.
Yes. He happened to be a Jesuit, and he went to Bill W. and he said, you know, what you're doing it certainly is inspired because it's basically, it's the spiritual exercises. It's Ignatian spirituality. And Bill W. was like, well, who's this Ignatius guy? I'd never heard of him. So there has been from the beginning a connection. You're very right. A connection between the two. So the similarity that you're seeing is definitely there.
Yeah.
And what is it? It's basically, I need to know myself, and I need to know my higher power. I need to know God.
But the point is, it's real easy to say, it's like, know yourself. It's very easy to say that. But the question is, how do you do it?
Oh no, that's not easy at all. Doing it is not easy at all. And again, that's what I'm saying. Don't be deterred by this, because again, we have the capacity to do this. We have a God-given capacity to do this. It needs to be awakened within us, and it can be. And what we're going to see when we get more into the discernment of spirits, Ignatius has such a deep understanding of the human person and the divine. He has such a deep understanding of how the human heart works. You'll look at this. He was writing this 500 years ago. But people are people. The people who were then are the people who are now. We're basically, we're human beings, and not too much has changed. We think we're so new and our problems are so new. No, look to the classics, and they have such a deep understanding to help us not only understand, well, how is God's spirit moving, but how is my spirit moving? How do I come to recognize that and what it looks like? And those things help me all the more to become aware of the movements not only of God's spirit, but my own spirit as well. So we'll see by his gifts that these steps will not only help us understand God, but come to understand ourselves even more. Some terms before we get into the first couple of rules. Ignatius speaks about two directions. A person moving away from God and a person moving towards God. And these are basic foundational movements. It's not something, I'm not going to be one and the other several times back and forth in a day. Generally speaking, I am either a person moving away from God or a person moving towards God. Now there may be in that transition period where somebody is really having a conversion experience where they're pulled much more back and forth between the two. But usually, I am either moving away from God or moving towards God. Now the person moving towards God can eventually turn around and go the other direction. Just as the person going this direction can turn around and go back towards God. But we're one or the other. And things are different if we're one or the other. The rules for the discernment of spirits has something for both, but usually a young man, an 18, 19, 20-year-old who's coming to Ignatius for a 30-day retreat is someone who has had some kind of a spiritual awakening and desires God in some way and is in some way moving towards Him. You're here on a Tuesday morning, so obviously there's something in you that desires a deeper relationship with God. So you are people moving towards God. There may have been a time in your life where you were the person moving away from God. And as we go through the first two rules, I'd like you to think very practically. How have you experienced this in your life? How have you experienced what's happening when you were moving away from God? If there was a period in your life where that was there, and as moving towards God, what have you experienced? Again, begin to apply them to your life, those two different movements. He speaks about, Ignatius, he speaks about the enemy. The enemy. By this he means evil spirits. Satan, other demons, our own tendencies in our own psyche towards evil. But he has a very clear, distinct understanding of Satan as a personal being. Created by God, the angels, created by God, fallen. Seeking to stop us from moving towards God. To really understand a lot of what Francis says, he's a Jesuit. He really is. You hear him speak. When you hear him speak so much of the language that he uses, especially when he's talking about spiritual things, as opposed to theological, specifically theological things, very Ignatian in his language. He very, very clearly speaks about the evil one. More than Benedict, than John Paul, he speaks about Satan. Speaks about the evil one. That's very Ignatian. Because in discerning spirits, I need to realize that it isn't just God's spirit that's acting in my life. It isn't only my own spirit that I need to be aware of. There's also the evil spirit working against me. And I need to discern that too. So that's the enemy. And then he mentions the good spirit. The good spirit. God, the Holy Spirit, angels, God working in us through gifts of grace and manifold influences for the good around us. So there's God's spirit, there's the evil spirit, there's my spirit. All of that's in the mix in discernment. Rule 1. Can someone who has good enough eyes to see read out for us rule number 1 from the sheet that's handed out there? Go for it.
First rule. The first rule is the person who goes from mortal sin to mortal sin. The enemy is commonly used to propose to them apparent pleasures, making them imagine sensual delights and pleasures in order to hold them more and make them grow in their vices and sins. These persons, the good spirit uses the opposite method, pricking them and biting their consciences through the process of reason.
All right. So, as I said, the rules for the discernment of spirits are rules for the game. In the first 2 rules, Ignatius is basically trying to help us see the 2 different teams playing. You got to know what your team's uniform looks like to root for your team.
Yeah.
So, in the first 2 rules, he's giving us some basic understanding of how the 2 teams work. The evil one's team and God's team. And what they look like. When we're in a point of moving away from God, the enemy has a certain way of acting, and God has a certain way of acting towards us. And this is consistent. Ignatius has experienced it. This is what it looks like, he's basically telling us. When we're moving away, what does the enemy do? He proposes apparent pleasures. Sure! Why shouldn't I do this or that or the other thing? That's a pretty looking lady. Oh, my wife's over there. No, that's a pleasure right there. I should go for that pleasure right there. Proposes pleasures that start to control my mind, that have power in my mind if I'm not aware of what's going on. Leads them to imagine sensual delights and pleasures to behold. Some might become focused on pleasure. I can become focused on these things that give me immediate gratification without any thought of what it's doing to me or to those around me, or just immediate pleasure. I become pulled into all of that. And then makes me grow in my vices. Makes me grow in my vices. It starts, most people don't jump into the deep end. They take one little step. Oh, that was good. Take another little step. And then another little step. and another little step. And suddenly I'm all the way over here and God is way back over there. Or the good, wherever I started out, is way back over there. And little by little, I become, the evil one gets me more and more focused on pleasure, on immediate gratification. A very superficial gratification. He keeps me in the superficial. And he keeps me not thinking, just pleasuring. The word reason is never used in that part. Ignatius uses it to describe the good spirit. If I'm moving away, what does the good spirit do? He stings and bites at my conscience. So he makes me uncomfortable. And he helps me to use my rational power of moral judgment, to use reason. Now, that may be from someone stepping into my life and trying to help me out. It may be awakening within myself. But we're going to see the two spirits act just the opposite. So if I'm moving away, the evil spirit is going to keep in front of me those pleasures that keep me almost hypnotized. Not thinking, just receiving that pleasure. And then he's going to have my mind all the more wrap around those pleasures. So I can't think. I'm just thinking of pleasure. I'm not reasoning. And I start to grow in those vices. Deeper and deeper and deeper. The good spirit does just the opposite. He tries to get at my ear and say, hey, think about this. Is this really doing you any good? Are you really happy? Turn back to me. And somehow, either through myself or through others that he may send to me through my own experiences, helps me to use reason to say, what am I doing? Yes?
My question is that you gave an example of, maybe a temptation towards adultery and something that's really bad. Can the pleasure be just comforts?
Well, what we're going to see, again, yes. When we're talking here about someone moving away from God, though, someone moving away from God can be tricked with bigger things. Someone moving towards God has to be tricked with much more subtle things.
Okay.
And we're going to see that as we go forward. So, but again, it starts, even the moving away starts slowly. It builds. I grow in my vices. So it's not all the way there. I mean, sometimes, with someone's experience, it may be that way, but usually it's just a slow pulling away and moving in that direction, where I'm not even aware that I'm moving in that direction.
So that's a notion of venial sin, mortal sin, in some way?
Yes, it can be, certainly I think it's going to, usually for most people, it would start slow. It would start small and little by little, building up to larger things. But I think what's key and what's different in someone moving away and someone moving towards also is that the evil spirit has our minds focusing on pleasure rather than reason. That's important. Because when I'm being reasonable, I'm suddenly realizing what I'm doing. Whereas as I grow, if I'm focused on pleasure, I'm not even aware of how far away I'm getting. Again, I'm not aware. Somebody had a hand up?
I was just going to say, I don't know if even simple things like for health reasons, it was suggested that I give up sugar, and I had done that for like 2.5 years. And then for good reason in your mind, people were sick, they counted on you, and you slowly drifted away. But then I noticed it was, is it still the same kind of thing? It started sleeping in slowly, and then you kind of let it in a little more, and then before you know it, 6 months later, you're totally out of control. You have no control.
It's the same concept, yes, but I think you need to be very clear that if you're moving towards God, there's something different happening than this. So again, what's the basic thing here? The basic thing here, am I moving towards God? This is the way the evil spirit is acting in me. This is the way the good spirit is acting in me. Let's look at the second one to see, because the second one is the person moving towards God. Could someone else read that one for me?
The second, the
persons who are going on intensely cleansing their sins and rising from good to better in the service of God our Lord. It is a method contrary to that in the first rule. For then it is the way of the evil spirit to bite, sadden, and put obstacles, disquieting with false reasons, that one may not go on, and it is proper to the good to give courage and strength, consolations, tears, inspiration, and quiet, easing and put away all obstacles that one may go on in well-doing.
Okay. We just heard a very important principle in the rules, and that's the principle of contrariety. In whatever situation where we are, for example, if we're moving away, the good spirit does this and the bad spirit does that. If I'm moving towards, they flip. They're doing kind of the same thing, flipped. The enemy is biting at me if I'm moving towards God. Who was biting at me when I was moving away? My conscience pulling me back. But if I'm moving towards God, the enemy is the one biting at me. He's gnawing. It can be, again, very subtle, as some of you were saying. It's not necessarily, the bee that comes into the room. It's the gnats. That are just it's just that. The gnats. It's a gnawing. It's not necessarily I got bit. It's a gnawing that, I don't even notice. But eventually that gnawing gets in. Gnawing. It triggers anxiety in me. And it diminishes my peace. So the enemy bites at me, he gnaws at me when I'm moving towards God to try and get me the other direction. He saddens me. Not sad like someone I love just passed away, but sad with respect to God. A sadness around prayer, a sadness about love of others. I suddenly start thinking, about that life I used to have, and I'm sad about following God. Working with university students, a lot of times the biggest breakthrough for them comes, one of the biggest obstacles for them at the beginning is, I want God, but I really want to be able to go out and binge drink on Friday night with my friends. Can I have both? And so there can be a certain sadness about losing that. That's the enemy trying to keep me there. A sadness about that loss and say, to follow God is sad. It's sad. He saddens me when I'm moving towards Him. He places obstacles in front of me. One of the best ways to know you've discerned rightly in taking action towards moving God is, as soon as you take that action, 500 things come up to try and stop it. He places obstacles in front of us. And He disquiets for false reasons, the rules say. He disquiets for false reasons. He is the father of lies. He's the father of lies. What are those lies? I'm moving towards God. I'm moving towards God. Who do you think you are? I know you. You're a horrible sinner. Get back where you belong. Lie. You think you can do this for the good of others? You're too weak. You'll give in. Give up now. Lies. False reasons. Lies. That's going to be important later on. But that's the way he acts. What does the good spirit do when I'm moving towards God? He gives courage and strength. Consolation and tears. Tears of joy. Tears of comfort. Tears of sadness for my sins. but tears of comfort that they're forgiven. He brings